I was 15, sitting in an English class. We'd been given the task of reading old poems and summarizing them in one sentence. Poems like To Autumn by John Keats, which you might say is about the abundance of life and the inevitability of death. I was not having a good time. I assumed everyone else was struggling just as much as I was, until I looked over my friend's shoulder and read her sentences. Each one was so beautiful, so evocative, such a perfect distillation of the poem's essence. I decided then and there that I was not a writer and could never be one. English had always been my favorite subject. This is some feedback I got on a short story I wrote when I was 9 or 10. Rachel, you went your own creative way again, to very good effect. Homework not completed. But at the end of that year, I decided to give up English, and I really never studied it again. That was fine until a few years ago, when I had an idea for a book. I had discovered that my family had this sort of hidden history, that my great-grandfather had been involved in getting Jews out of Russia to Texas. But that's a story for another time. I felt like I had no training to write this book. So I decided to turn to the best teachers I could find, and I let them help me write it. You don't have to meet people to learn from them. I think we all know this instinctively. Maybe your yoga teacher is on YouTube. Maybe your meditation teacher is on an app. And yet we go through life feeling unqualified for the things we most want to do. We all have creative heroes, those people you'd give anything to be in a room with. But you can be in a room with them, or at least they can be in a room with you. Your creative heroes have probably been on loads of podcasts. There are probably old newspaper interviews or radio interviews with them online. All their best advice is out there waiting for you to find it and use it. That's what I did. For 4 years, I didn't really listen to any music, didn't listen to audiobooks, definitely didn't listen to the sound of my own thoughts. I took bike rides and walks in the park and baths that went cold, and I listened to my mentors talking to me through my headphones. They got me through every insoluble problem, every structural tangle, every moment in the writing process when I felt out of my depth, which was most of the time. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that they told me. Lesson 1 comes from the short story writer George Saunders, who for many years has taught a master's in creative writing at Syracuse University. Every year, 600 people apply for 6 places. But I have a suspicion that all the wisdom he shares with those 6 students, he also shares with anyone who asks. George Saunders goes on lots of podcasts to promote his books, and usually he just ends up talking about craft and the writing process. His one novel is called Lincoln in the Bardo, and it's about Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie. When I was reading it, I could feel how finely crafted it was, how tightly strung it was. There are some books you read and you feel like the words have come pouring out of the writer in a sort of stream of consciousness. I generally hate those books. This felt like more similar to the book I wanted to write. In one podcast I listened to, George Saunders said 3 words that changed my whole mindset, words I still repeat to myself to this day. Prose isn't delicate. It reminded me that writing is not like charcoal drawing, when you draw something so atrocious you have to rub it out, and maybe the page rips or crinkles a bit, and then you draw your second attempt over that and your third attempt, and by the time you've finished, there's all this ghostly evidence of all your failures. Writing would never betray you like that. Smash your work into pieces. Write a first draft, rework it, move the end to the beginning, send it to a friend who sends back 1 million more edits, and your work will be better after all of this than it was before. I took George Saunders' advice, and I separated my whole book into individual sentences, and then I rearranged those sentences until they were jangly with energy, which is another George Saunders phrase. Then I separated my book into scenes and rearranged those scenes, and probably cut 1/3 of them. Writing my book, if I had written it by hand, using scissors and a stapler to edit it, it would have been more staple than paper by the end. I could have held it up and seen the light shine through the holes like net curtains. But your final draft doesn't bear any scars of what it's been through. It doesn't show the joins, because prose isn't delicate. Lesson 2. When I started writing my book, I also started writing a diary. And one of the first entries was, "It is coming out shockingly badly." I remember reading back over what I'd written and thinking it was as if I'd never learnt the English language. I quite often fell into the trap of hating my work and therefore hating myself. The thing that got me out of the trap was this. I learnt to be okay with being horrified by how bad my work was. One of the main requirements of being a writer is a certain persistence, or steeliness, as Zadie Smith called it in one interview I listened to. Elizabeth Gilbert, whose TED Talks you should watch, says that everyone goes and sits down at their desk on day 1, and when they come back on day 2, they hate what they did on day 1 so much that they give up. You have to learn to forgive yourself if you want to come back on day 3. There's a beloved American radio producer called Ira Glass who makes a program called This American Life, which he describes as true stories which unfold like little movies. They're so good, they make you want to sit in your car after you've got home just to finish listening to them. And they feel effortless. But Ira Glass says that creative work wants to be bad. That's its natural state. You have to force it into being good against its will, and it's going to fight back. Zadie, Ira, and Elizabeth reminded me that everything starts out terrible, and in my case, carries on being terrible for a long time. Working on my book felt like being at the bedside of a sick person, wondering how I could help them. But I was told to keep faith, and so I did, and gradually my writing became less and less terrible. Lesson 3. Lesson 3 comes from a writer called Anthony Doerr, who wrote a historical novel called All the Light We Cannot See, which is about a girl called Marie, and it's set in France in World War II. I found a recording of a speech he made about cliches. He said that he was once sitting in his basement in Idaho, trying to write a scene about Marie, where she was in a train station in Paris in the summer of 1940 on a sweltering hot day. And he wrote, in his basement in Idaho, "The sweat prickled on the top of her scalp." When he read it back, he hated it so much that he decided to go through his book and banish any phrase in the genre of "the sweat prickled on the top of her scalp." When I read it, I suddenly began noticing cliches everywhere. Cliches are not just those famous, well-worn phrases like "only time will tell" or "every cloud has a silver lining." A cliche is any pre-packaged string of words put together not by you, but by someone else. They're so tempting to reach for, and they sneak into our writing without us noticing. I should probably tell you a bit about my book. The main character is a long-forgotten Victorian novelist called Israel Zangwill, and a lot of my research was going through old newspapers trying to find interesting descriptions of him. A phrase I came across a lot was that he had a way with words. So I knew he was articulate, but I wanted to find a less cliched description. I finally found something I liked. It was a New York journalist who had met him in 1898. And instead of saying he had a way with words, he said this: "He is a skimmy talker, flitting from one subject to another, with the agile grace of the man who jumps over a long line of elephants in the circus, touching each elephant with his toe as he sails towards the mattress." I couldn't put my finger on why I liked it so much until I realized I had never read words packaged together in this way. "He had a way with words" leaves me cold. The mind starts to wander even before the sentence is finished. But a man jumping over a line of elephants? It felt alive and electric. And I think this should be our goal when writing, to use language in a new or thoughtful or evocative way. This year, my book came out. I sent it to one of the writers who unwittingly mentored me through the process, never expecting to hear back. A month later, a postcard arrived on my doormat, and it was from her saying how much she'd liked the book. Maybe you're a filmmaker, or a painter, or an entrepreneur, and maybe you feel that if only you had the right guidance, you'd be able to solve your creative problems. Your guides are out there. Find them and learn from them, even if they have no idea you exist, because one day they might. Thank you.